I pay homage to the Buddha. I pay homage to the Dhamma. I pay homage to the Sangha. So let me just check my calendar real quick to make sure I've got the right weekend here. Yes. So today is both Valentine's Day weekend and also President's Day weekend. So I suppose it's as good a time as any to give a talk on both love and hate. Now I will say that I brought a book with me today, and the way I came about bringing this book is kind of interesting, because what happened is that after I heard Bishop Marianne Buddy give a very heartfelt plea, let's say, to our current administration to be merciful, kind, compassionate, and to see it received by certain people at an administration as somehow nasty, mean, and political. I was very curious to learn more about Bishop Marianne Buddy, so I found out that she had published a book. I think it's called How We Learn to Be Brave or something like that. And apparently I was not unique in that desire or interest, because when I went to go find the book, it was sold out everywhere. And so I did put in an order for it with Vromans in Pasadena. It's one of my favorite bookstores. And it was in back order, so it took a while. And so since it was taking a while, I thought, okay, well, I'll look at some of the books that I currently have in my possession. And as a surprise to nobody, I have a lot of books because I love to read. And so my wife and I together over the years have amassed quite a library. We have multiple bookcases in our very small home. And some of these books that I have are varied in topics, let's say, because I've always been very interested in not just Buddhism, but several religions and several spiritualities. And when I was younger, I dabbled quite a bit and practiced quite a few different things. And I don't know how many years ago, maybe something like maybe 20-something years ago, this book came into my possession, which is Anamchara, a book of Celtic wisdom by John O'Donohue. And, it came into my possession because I was interested in Celtic spirituality. Some of my ancestry is from Scotland and the UK kind of in general. And so I was dabbling and looking around and practicing with different groups. And someone recommended the book, and so I had it in my possession. But the book itself is very kind of Celtic Christianity and stuff like that. So I just sort of put it on the bookcase and ignored it for a long time. But recently I've entered a very interesting time in my life where I'm very, let's say, open to the possibility of synthesis. And what I mean by that is that all of these different belief systems that I had dabbled in when I was younger, at a certain point I got real serious about Buddhism and set them all aside, as in like, they're not Dhamma, they're not serious. I'm going to put them over there. And now my attitude is a bit different, and more the sense that I find Buddhism as having liberative wisdom, but that doesn't exclude other traditions from having wisdom all the same, some kind of wisdom to share. And so I've been reading into the book and really exploring a fun topic. Anamchara is an Irish Gaelic term that we might find really similar once we start applying it to Buddhism, because an Anamchara basically means soul friend, or like spiritual friend. And like when you know it, in Buddhism we got an idea very similar to that. We have the idea of the Kalyanamitta, the spiritual or admirable friend. And so I've been kind of playing with that idea because it is this Valentine's Day sort of time when we're talking about friendship and love and all these other qualities. So it's been fun to dabble and sort of look in his book and see what wisdom I can find. Now I will say though that it is interesting because over the years, Anamchara, which was a term that back in the olden days of Ireland and other Gaelic and Celtic cultures, Anamchara was more like someone's confidant, more in the sense that we tend to use Kalyanamitta. It's someone on the path that's a mentor, a guide, keeps you on the straight and narrow, keeps you honest with yourself, someone who knows you intimately. And over the years, Anamkhara has meant more like soulmate, the way we kind of understand soulmate in the West now. You know, there's a whole world of people out there, and there's just one person out there that's meant just for you romantically, your partner, you know, and that person. And so now these days, you'll even see Anamkhara rings that people wear. They'll buy it and give it to each other, little gifts. You're my soulmate. Soulmates are kind of an interesting topic for me as someone who studied Greek philosophy, because I kind of know the origins of soulmates in at least the Western world, going back to Plato and Socrates, and really weird ideas about how souls fit together. You know, there was this idea in one of Plato's books that was proposed not by Plato or Socrates, but by some other guy in a discussion. I think it was in Symposium, where it's you basically have people that were once these beings that had several limbs and wings and all these two heads and all this other stuff, and they were broken apart, and that's how we have the bodies we have now. We're chasing after our other half throughout time until we find our other half and can merge together in some way. And the thing is that Anamkhara has no anything like that in its history. It's only recently it's kind of meant soulmate. Kalyanamitta is kind of at least exempt from that. I don't think there's anyone out there who's teaching Kalyanamitta as soulmate. But it is kind of interesting the way we can talk about what it means to be someone's admirable friend. And I'll see if I can do so romantically by talking about my own marriage as well. But I'll share a passage from John O'Donohue's book, because I find what he has to say about relationship profound. So I'll share that first to sort of set the stage of what I might say later on, what might end up being more of a tapestry of ideas around love and hate and goodwill and admirable friendship and things like that. So this is a passage where John O'Donohue is talking about intimacy as sacred. And he says, in our culture, there is an excessive concentration on the notion of relationship. People talk incessantly about relationships. It is a constant theme on television, film, and in the media. Technology and media are not uniting the world. They pretend to provide a world that is interneted, but in reality, all they deliver is a simulated world of shadows. Accordingly, they make our human world more anonymous and lonely. In a world where the computer replaces human encounter and psychology replaces religion, it is no wonder that there is an obsession with relationship. Unfortunately, however, relationship has become an empty center around which our lonely hunger forages for warmth and belonging. Much of the public language of intimacy is hollow, and its incessant repetition only betrays the complete absence of intimacy. Real intimacy is a sacred experience. It never exposes its secret trust and belonging to the voyeuristic eye of a neon culture. What I find really shocking about this passage is that it could have been written today to describe today's online culture, to describe today's television and media and the news and everything else. And yet, John O'Donohue passed away, I think, in maybe 2004, and he wrote this book in 1997, or at least that's when it was published. So that means he was talking about a world that, like, didn't even have the internet as we have it now. 97, what was he talking about? AOL? You know? The Bachelor wasn't even on TV yet, you know? And somehow he managed to get it so completely right that in a world that tries to emphasize the importance of intimacy, love, and relationship, it's also one that highly trivializes it Because right now I just pointed out The Bachelor and little chuckles, little smiles, things like that. But it's true. We tend to trivialize love, right? Love Island, love is blind, love is whatever. All these ways that we trivialize love. There's TV shows where people get married on the same day they meet each other, and it's voyeuristic and put out there. It is that neon culture that John O'Donohue's talking about. And so what does it mean to love, and what does it mean to be truly intimate? That's kind of what I'm curious in exploring. You'll notice that for a while now, when I've been doing the metta meditations, I've been trying to move further and further away of translating metta as loving kindness. And the reason I have for that is because metta doesn't mean love. Even though today there are many people who keep translating it that way. They even take the kindness part away and they just translate metta as love. But metta doesn't mean that. If you look into the word and you translate it, it does mean something more like goodwill. There might be other words that work better, but that's not it. In Pali, we do have a word that means love. It's pema. And there even are passages, suttas, that talk about it. But it's interesting the way that the Pali Canon talks about pema, because it tends to be very linked with another emotion or another quality that we tend to not find very admirable, we tend to not respect, because the thing that pema, love, is often tied to is anger, hatred, aversion. In fact, that's the exact description that's given in the Pema Sutta that's in the Anguttara Nikaya. It's in the grouping of fours. I think it's like 200 something. I don't remember it off the top of my head. But in this sutta, the Buddha talks about the four kinds of qualities that there are around love and hate. And so he talks about the love that is born of love, and he talks about the love that is born of hate, and he talks about the hate that is born of love, and he talks about the hate that is born of hate. And we can think about them, of how they sort of merge and work together. The gist of it is, if you love someone, your love tends to be partial. And that what I mean is that if there's someone that you love, you tend to like or love the people who love them too, right? So let's say you have a particular person that you admired in the past. For example, I used to be a big Travel Channel watcher. I loved Anthony Bourdain. Loved that guy, right? Even though I don't know how much we can admire some of the choices he's made and stuff that he did and the things he enjoyed to eat and things like that. But I still liked the way he put words together. He's very poetic, wrote in a very effective way that caught my interest. And so if I would read reviews of people talking about him negatively, I might all of a sudden have an opinion about them. Like, now I don't like them so much, right? I wouldn't go so far as to say hate, but there's a little bit of that quality there, right? Now I'm more aversive to those people. We can make it more personal, right? I can remember one time when I was in high school and I was dating my first serious girlfriend. Ooh, right? And we were both theater kids. Surprise. And we got invited to be extras in a movie. And it was crazy because it was filming like a rock concert and we were going to be extras in the concert in the crowd. And so, the scene was supposed to take place sometime in the summer, so naturally it was the dead of winter at 2 a.m. And so we're doing the whole thing. We're pretending we're at the concert. The band's not even on the stage. They're just playing the track. And we're like, yeah, what was it? Smash Mouth or something. I can't remember. And we're pretending we're in a concert. And some guys were starting to pretend a little too well. They decide they're going to start doing moshing stuff, right? And they keep bumping into me and my girlfriend, not their girlfriend, my girlfriend, right? And so now I'm mad at these guys for bumping into my girlfriend. How dare they? And I was like willing to duke it out, dumb little 15-year-old me or whatever, right? And there we go. We see how I had at that point aversion or hatred born out of love. Love or affection is the other way we can translate pema. And the Buddha doesn't seem to separate those two in any way that actually would benefit us in terms of looking at Pema as a good quality. Because he talks about how, all right, this is how Pema, this is how love works with aversion, right? Works with anger and hatred. And they kind of go back and forth in this way. We love because we love, we hate because we love, we hate because we hate, and we love because we hate, and so on, right? All these different ways. And then after that, he goes, okay, I'm going to describe these other things we can do. And he talks about the jhanas. And he gives the normal explanation of the jhanas. The first jhana, seclusion, and it's born of this, and, it gives rise to joy and rapture and whatever, and all that stuff. And he goes on, go further. But at the end of each one, he talks about the first jhana, the second jhana, third jhana, and fourth jhana, which are qualities of deep absorption, meditation. And at the end of each one of those, he says, and notice how those are devoid of love and hatred, right? And now, this might sound odd to modern day Buddhists because, again, as I said, oftentimes when we have that quality of metta, it gets translated as love. We're taught about how Buddhism is about love and loving all beings without exception. It's always about love, love, love. And in the history of that, it's actually quite interesting. If you look at why that happened, I can't find any evidence of Buddhists talking about love in that way until sometime around like the 70s or so, when Thich Nhat Hanh was working with a lot of Western ministers involved in civil rights. And that's when Thich Nhat Hanh started talking about the importance of love in Buddhism, which is not to say that he was wrong to do so, just to say that before that we were talking about metta, certainly, goodwill, certainly, but we weren't talking about love. Love all of a sudden became really important in certain parts of Buddhism. And as Buddhism has become more popular throughout the United States, the Western world, and also just kind of brought back into the East, it is now just we talk about love. You even have people in the Theravada tradition talking about the importance of love, 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 love. And in trying to change the way we talk about metta and move it away from love, I might even have said things in a perhaps not as skillful a way of not prioritizing goodwill as something more transcendent than love, the kind of love that is bound up with anger, aggression, resentment, things like that. By saying, oh, well, if you're practicing metta, you don't have to love people, just at least have goodwill for them. And in that way, I'm actually minimizing goodwill. I think that the Buddha, in the language he was speaking, and certainly in the language that we have in the Pali Canon, was trying to make the point that goodwill is actually more transcendent than love, which doesn't make love a bad thing. It just means that love, the way we usually express it, the way we usually feel it, is preferential and is tied up with other emotions that might not be as skillful. And so I think that as we develop the path, we are learning to be more skillful in gradients, not all at once, not abandoning right away, which means that we're not practicing to abandon love, but rather to learn how to love more skillfully, recognizing that as we're developing this love, we're also looking to transcend love into something that is more universal, something that we can give without measure, which is exactly how the Buddha does describe metta, the way he does describe goodwill, as something truly universal, something not preferential, something that we can expand and give out in all directions. So that might be one of the ways we can think about it. Now, in the passage I shared from John O'Donohue, one of the other things we talked about was intimacy. Now, intimacy is something that we tend to think is important in our culture, but again, we don't really hold it important. We do tend to trivialize it in these various ways. We take human intimacy and make voyeuristic shows out of it, do different things with it, even play with it in our own lives. You think I'm maybe exaggerating? Look at Tinder. Trivial. They've gamified romance. They've turned it into a little card with someone's name, age, a little info about them, and they're swiping left and right, left and right, left and right. And that becomes more enjoyable than the actual date itself a lot of the time for many people. That's the thing they actually like doing. No, maybe, no, yes. Oh, we didn't match. Well, darn. Go and go and go. And that's gamified in that way. And that's something that's meant to help people find their date that might become their partner, that might become their mate, and and so on. But it's all very playful the way it's done. So how do we establish true intimacy in our lives? That could be something we can think about. And I think that we truly do, in the same way we develop metta, in the same way we learn to be a kalyanamitta, the way we learn to be an admirable friend, is we have to start with ourselves, right? If we don't intimately know ourselves, I think we're going to struggle to find true intimacy with others. And this is something that I'm not just paying lip service to. This is something I truly try to practice. People know that I'm a layperson. I'm not a monk. I am married. And some people know my wife and myself, and they tend to sometimes put us on a pedestal because they know that we have a very good relationship. They know that we don't really fight, that we're this Buddhist, and in my wife's case more Buddhist adjacent, but Buddhist couple that practice together and do things together. They admire the fact that my wife will go on little retreats with me, that she'll meditate sometime at 4 hours at a time. They're really amazed. They're amazed at the kind of lifestyle that we live. And I'm not saying this to be, grandiose or anything, but there's just this sense that I've had from some people like, wow, look at how great you guys are. As if it just happened by magic. As if we just got there day one. We just met and we were soulmates and it was that easy. And one of my favorite examples of this kind of detrimental thinking comes from a story about Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, who's one of my role models. I love Fred Rogers. And, he's the kind of person that people often think of as a saint. The sainted Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers in his neighborhood, teaching children how to be neighborly and to be good people and all that stuff. And they saw the way he was and how gentle he was, the way he spoke to people, the clear love and grace with which he interacted with everyone. He was even a vegetarian because, as he said, he couldn't eat anything that had a mother, things like that. People were just like, aw. And like, he's perfect, right? And his wife, when she found out about that, actually got really mad. She said, and the rest of his family too, his sons, were like, no, please don't call him a saint, because if you do so, you start perpetuating this idea that he didn't have to work at it every single day of his life. Because he did. It was a constant practice. Something that he had to do. Like, he had to wake up early, make the choice to pray, to do the things that he did, or whatever kind of meditation he might have done. He did journaling. He wrote letters to people every single day. There were people he thought about time and time again. In much a similar way that we can do metta practice every single day, he was doing his own form of metta, thinking of various people and wishing them well, wishing them happiness and peace, and just doing this as an activity every single day that he had to work on. And it's the same thing that we have to do to be that kind of person in the world. To be a true kalyanamitta, to have real intimacy, it's a thing that we have to develop. And so in the case of my wife and me, we both had to work on things individually. Whether that be therapy, whether it be talking with friends, whether it be our spiritual and religious practices. We had to do all of those things to understand our own minds, our own hearts, our own wounds that we might be reactive to when they get triggered, when they get touched and poked and prodded. And then we had to bring that together and work on it together by having long conversations, talking to each other, doing couples counseling and therapy, right? Going to places like the temple together and going on retreats together, going off into nature together, things like that. And this in itself echoes the Buddha's own advice when people ask, like, hey, how do my partner and I have a good life together, and how do we end up at the same destination? How do we end up in the same heaven together? How do we achieve the goal and become liberated together? And he gave an example of essentially that, people who are living lives more or less in lockstep in the sense that they have the same priorities. They have the same desires to be skillful and kind and compassionate, wise and discerning. And the only way a couple ends up being like that is because both of them separately, individually are like that. You have to do that stuff yourself. One of the things that John O'Donohue talks about, which I really like, is talking about our inner world, our interior world, which is separate from everyone, including our partners, our spouses, even our teachers and guides and mentors on the path. You think about the example where the Buddha says that he cannot make you enlightened. You have to do the work yourself, right? And that goes to every relationship we have. No one can make you a better person. You have to do the work of learning how to be skillful. And you have to become intimate and aware of everything happening inside your mind and heart. One of the ways that John O'Donohue talks about it is that he looks at us as artists within our own mind and heart. The way I've often talked about it is more like a gardener. You're pulling out the weeds, you're planting good seeds and things like that. And John O'Donohue looks at it more as being an artist, like a painter or a writer or a poet or something, a real creative in the internal landscape of yourself. And he talks about it as both a burden and a privilege, because it's true. It's not always great and fun work to look at the shadows you have in your heart, but it is rewarding, good work that pays off. But it ends up feeling like work. You know, it's sort of like when you do find a garden that hasn't been tended for very long or very well, and there's all kinds of stuff happening in there in the soil, and you have to do the work of cleaning it up and making it useful again. You know, you might have to muck out a bunch of stuff that you didn't really want to touch. And some of that stuff, when we take it back to the example of our mind and heart, is stuff that's in there that we would rather not see. And today I was talking about how meditation allows us to still our minds so that we're able to illuminate our minds and hearts and see all the shadows and finally pierce the darkness. And once we can see those things, we can actually do that work of removing them, that process of replacing them with things that are more skillful. So intimacy begins with ourselves. We have to be intimately knowledgeable of ourselves and our motivations, why we do the things that we do, and to understand what our intentions are for our life, what kind of person we want to be, who we want to be in the world, what we want to put out there. And we have, luckily, many ways in which we can work on that, including interpersonally. I'm very fortunate that I have a relationship with my spouse where we hold each other accountable. We are kalyanamitta or anamkhara in that same way. We keep each other on the straight and narrow because we know each other well enough to know what we admire and what we aspire to be. We know what morals and virtues we want to have, and we hold each other to it. I can't remember how many times early on in our marriage I would say something a particular way, and no one is there. It's just me and my wife. There's no cameras, there's no voice recorder, there's no teacher or mentor over my shoulder kind of looking in and listening in. And she would say, you know, the thing you said right now wasn't very skillful. And it would be on me to hear that and not just respond like, whatever, be quiet, it's fine. Or, but really take it in and go, okay, well, is she right? You know what? That was a bit of malice, right? It was a bit of like a white lie, or it was whatever it was in whatever case it might be. Some kind of unnecessary exaggeration or some kind of hateful, spiteful words or something. And you go, you know what? I'm not the person who wants to speak that way. And it was good of her to call me on it, right? And vice versa. There are examples where I've done the same for her, where there's a particular activity where, hey, you said you wanted to do such and such activity every day, and I noticed yesterday you didn't do it. Perhaps today we can do it together, right? So she wants to take on a new habit. She wants to journal every day. And be like, okay, you said you were going to journal, so I'm going to get my journal out and we'll journal together. Things like that. That's the kind of stuff that we can work on. And so we take that intimacy that we have with ourselves in terms of intimate knowledge, truly knowing ourselves, and then we can apply that to a relationship, and it doesn't need to be a romantic one. That's just the example I have for today, because it's Valentine's Day weekend. And we can then share with someone in a way that we both become intimately knowledgeable of each other, and that knowledge then gets turned into action, which is the important part. Because once you are knowledgeable of yourself, and you have people around you who are also knowledgeable of you and the kind of person you want to be, then you have a support system in place to be that person, to put your aspirations into action and to then do and create, be that artist or gardener or whatever, whichever example we want. So I'll end today with, since I'm incorporating some Celtic wisdom into today's Dharma lesson, I'll end with a prayer that I learned in my Celtic spirituality days when I was doing that. And I'll rephrase it in a way just slightly to make sense of the context we're in, since we're in a temple, not in a grove of trees like druids of old. But I think it'll be useful in how we think about kalyanamitta, how we think about metta, how we think about goodwill. So the prayer is very simple. In the still center of my being, may I find peace. In the silence of the temple, may I share peace. Gently, out in the world, may I radiate peace. So I'll end with that. Thank you.